All right, so the Southern Pine Beetle. Who in the audience has heard of it heretofore? Just a show of hands. Okay, so folks are familiar with it. Glad to hear that I guess the media has helped with that. So Southern Pine Beetle was initially discovered on the island, well, in 2014. That's when we first became aware of it. But we have some anecdotal evidence that it may have been here actually even much longer than that, particularly out on the South Fork. It represents, obviously, a major threat to the forest. In our pine barrens here, the dominant species of trees in our pine barrens forests are pitch pines and oaks. And this particular organism really loves our pitch pines. Unfortunately, once it infests a tree, that tree is going to die. And it can die in as little as 2 to 4 months. And we have a number of public entities, the commission of which I'm a part, DEC, to which John belongs, that are working together with a number of other entities to try to respond to and combat this problem. Unfortunately, it's here to stay, and so we're going to have to learn how to live with it. So these two slides here just show, basically they're about 6 months apart. The slide here on the left shows clusters of both confirmed and suspected areas of Southern Pine Beetle infestation. This is from last summer. And then this is showing more recently in January of this year. So you can see that some potential increases there. The yellow dots are areas that are suspect and that need to be confirmed on the ground by trained teams. So the Southern Pine Beetle is not an invasive species. It's not a foreign organism. It doesn't come from Europe or Asia. It's actually native to the southern United States. Unfortunately, because of climate change, global warming, it has been steadily advancing northward. A few years ago, the New York Times had some articles on it showing talking about the devastation in the Jersey pinelands, and we thought that we'd have at least a few more years before it might show up here, and lo and behold, back in October 2014, right after we had our Pine Barrens Research Forum here, we started discovering areas that had this Southern Pine Beetle infestation, first starting in Connecticut River State Park, and then also in Wortham National Wildlife Refuge. So this is just a little bit about the background. The beetles advancing northward. Female beetles initiate the attract. They're kind of like sentinels. They go out, they find a particular host tree. If they feel it's a suitable host, they will emit a pheromone, and that pheromone combined with natural volatile chemicals from the pitch pine tree attracts additional beetles. The beetles drill through the bark. They create these galleries. They lay eggs. The larvae start to wend their way through the living tissue, the cambium layer of the tree, and ultimately the tree gets girdled and dies. The only way that the pine trees can defend themselves is by exuding pine sap. And trees are successful if they can exude copious quantities of that sap. And unfortunately, because of the trees are competing with one another for space, light, nutrients, and so forth, they're not able to exude as much sap to overcome these attacks by the beetles, and the beetles are able to overwhelm those defenses. They swim against that pine sap and then infest the tree. Okay, next slide. So the Southern Pine Beetle is accompanied by, there's several fungi that it's accompanied by. There's a symbiotic one that it actually helps spread that its larvae feed on. There's another one that you may have heard of called blue stain fungus, which is antagonistic to the fungus that the Southern Pine Beetle larvae feed upon. The blue stain fungus by itself can also either accelerate the death of the tree or by itself can kill the tree because it clogs some of the living tissue of the tree and prevents water uptake. Okay. This is just a from the National Science Foundation, just showing the life cycle. It's rather complex, showing all these different relationships. The beetles also carry a mite with them as well. So the southern pine beetles are dormant during the winter. Generally, when the temperatures get to the mid-50s and they're sustained for at least a week or more is when they start to emerge and they start looking for host trees. Very extreme cold temperatures will kill them. The winter before last, we had some of the coldest temperatures recorded here. I believe in the dwarf pines right behind where our office is located, we recorded a temperature of -8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what you really need to really sustain significant mortality of the beetles. So those sustained very cold winters can help to knock out the beetles. And in fact, there was some work that was done investigating, doing some spot checking of tree bark to see if there are any larvae or how the larvae fared after that very cold winter, and found there was some significant mortality. Unfortunately, after this winter we've had, which has been much milder, we're not as confident there will be as many significant deaths. So here's a close-up, up close and personal of the beetle. It's much larger in this picture than than you might have seen like in those 1950s movies, those gloom and doom ones with giant ants and so forth that are devouring people. It's actually much smaller than that. Next slide. These are some of the areas that have been infested. The beetles make up for their diminutive size by attacking in significant numbers. So you can see we have areas in Hampton Bays, Flanders, Hampton Bays, Oakdale, where Connecticut State Park is, Hauppauge. So basically, a good portion of Suffolk County, with the exception of the Twin Forks, has the beetle present. And the most significant concentration is in the central pine barrens. So what does an infestation look like? So if you're up in a plain, you'll see here some dead trees, what we call stage 3 trees. These are trees that are turning yellow and red, indicating that they are infested. These are pitch pine trees. And this is just an area in Werthen National Wildlife Refuge, just one section. You can see that the trees here were turning in the early 2015, are already turning yellow and red, showing the infestation. Another area of Wertheim, showing dead trees in the foreground, and that area that we had shown previously. And then this is just an area of in Hubbard County Park. It's not too far east of here. You can see areas here and here where trees are under attack. Then you have a substantial infestation in East Quogue. You can see these trees that were taken a year ago, a photo taken a year ago showing that. And this shows the progression. This particular image will show the progression over a year's period of how much this infestation has grown. And this is an area where there were no suppression cuts that were undertaken, so the infestation grew unchecked. So it's a pretty significant growth in this particular area. And this is just showing an example of what happens in the course of a year. Very dramatic photos from an area in Texas showing in 1 year's time. Here's July 1992. Then preceding this one, you see after a year, this whole area, 7,500 acres, was infested by southern pine beetle. This is what an infestation looks like from the ground. Again, seeing your pitch pine trees in those yellow and red colors. Looking up at them as well, you'll see that they're starting to lose needles, and again, starting to turn yellow and red. And this is, again, another picture of the beetle. So it's very small, the size of a chocolate sprinkle. Before, some folks had likened it to the size of an uncooked grain of rice. There are other beetles that are similar to it. One is called the black turpentine beetle, which is actually native to this area. They have some distinct differences. They're much larger. They don't attack the entire trunk of the tree. They stay in the lower portion of the tree. And when they infest a pitch pine tree, they don't necessarily kill it. The southern pine beetle will. And this is just showing the southern pine beetle on the left, grain of rice, and a black turpentine beetle on the right. I think if you just click on that. So they're just showing a beetle right here, adult beetle, working its way through some exuded pine sap, some pitch on a pine tree. And this is showing what the globules of pine sap look like. They're translucent or reddish, often popcorn shaped, and they very often will have some dead beetles in them. And this is an example of what you'll see on a tree that's infested with them, these globules of pine sap that have been exuded all up and down the bark. And again, so just talking about the different stages, we have characterizing fresh attacks are called stage 1. Stage 2 attacks are when the foliage is starting to change, the needles are starting to change, and then stage 3 are completely dead trees from which the beetles have emerged. So southern pine beetle response, I think John's going to talk about that at this point in time. Here's a pointer if you want it. There's a pointer here too. Okay, that's all right.
Thank you, John. So as far as our response, like John said, it's a multi-agency, multi-pronged approach. We've had very good intergovernment workings with National Park Service, National Wildlife Refuge, and it's a huge problem, and I'm really happy how well everyone has worked together on this. We have started out using ICS structure to organize this. It's a very complicated thing. We have many different agencies. Right now, Albany is heading it, which makes a lot more sense for the organizational structure of it. And we're kind of the satellite because that's where we are down here. So we use this to try to organize the best we can. And this is showing the structure we have here. We try to spread it out so it's not just heavily DEC. We have, Central Pine Barrens Commission involved. And you can see for yourself. The 5 big things we're trying to do is it's always aerial survey, how far the infestation is spread, where are our problem areas from there. So with that picture you saw with the fading trees, we go up in a plane, we have a little GPS so we can track where we are. We circle it with the GIS systems. And then when we go out then we can send people on the ground to truth it, because sometimes it might be turpentine, sometimes it might be salt kill spray. It might not necessarily be southern pine beetle. And then from there we try to organize where is the best place to go out and suppress. So we've probably done over a dozen flights by now. I was very happy to go up in a helicopter for this, but it's amazing. It's really difficult to understand the nature of the infestation from the ground. We've had people, especially that Quag site, say it's not that bad. It doesn't look that bad of an infestation. As you saw on the other slide, it was enormous. When I saw that, it literally took my breath away. So this is to show what we kind of do. So all these little polygons are what we do when we fly. We circle it, and then from there we try to figure out what the number of infested trees are. So you could see that, Wertheim had a very large infestation. Our largest one we had on state land was at Henry's Hollow out in the Hampton Bays. So it just gives you an idea that it is widespread, but it's not, we're a little hesitant to show this picture because some people see it and freak out. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Not every single one of these is a full-blown infestation. And this is just to show the overlay of potential basal area loss. Of course, that's why we're concerned about the Pine Barrens, the Central Pine Barrens. So people ask, why are we so concerned with this? Because this is where the beetle can behave the best way it does, go out and destroy thousands of acres in 1 year. So this is where we go out the ground surveys. We use a system with cell phones, use the smartphones. We go out, pretty much walk the perimeter. We go and we take basal area samples. So that way we know that the beetle likes anything over 80 square foot basal area. So we know that if we go and say there's an area that's a 200 basal area, we know that that one is very prone for infestation, higher on the risk that we should go and attack it. Here's some pictures of us going out, looking at it. And as far as the forest management, so suppression is a short-term management. It's like a Band-Aid. So the long-term is creating the forest environment that does not foster the infestation to occur. So, like I said, suppression right now, the long-term goal would be prescribed burns, potential thinning in some areas. And as far as suppression, what we've done is we've kind of changed it. At first, we were just cutting the trees and bucking them. What we decided to do now, we took from National Wildlife Refuge, what they did is they took a chainsaw, did a line to make the bark pop off easier. And so what that is it kills a lot more beetles than just bucking it into smaller areas. I was lucky enough to go to New Jersey to learn from them. They've been dealing with it for over a decade. So New Jersey is the closest thing we have. And it was nice to talk with them, learn from them. And they said, this beetle, once you think you have it figured out, it'll throw you a curveball. You'll never, you think it'll behave a certain way. They said their infestations were near water. So far that's been true. That quag site was not near water, so it's a surprise for all of us. Here's an example of what we talk about when suppression. Essentially, you try to fell the trees in the direction of the expanse. Like the other picture you can see, there's a best example is like a wildfire. It kind of goes in predictable pattern, not necessarily with the wind, sometimes with the prevailing winds. But so you go and you cut the infested trees, hopefully back into the infestation. What that does is when the beetles do emerge, it does not kill all the beetles, but the beetles that do emerge are confused. They don't have the pheromone trails. It's been proven so far to work somewhat effectively. So this is just a highlight of what we've done so far. We've cut over 8,000 trees all throughout DEC lands, Suffolk County lands. Out in National Park Service, they've done suppression. National Wildlife Refuge, they've done suppression. And we're thankful enough to have the Excelsior Corps. They were just at the Connecticut State Park, and they were helping them with their efforts there. When we do this suppression, we do not cut the stage 3 trees because they are habitat not just for woodpeckers and squirrels and all that, but they're also a habitat for the clarid, which is the predatory beetle. Now, the beetle will not kill Southern Pine Beetle in the hopes of eradicating it. What we use it more as a tool of seeing if there's a huge number of clarids in an area. That means there's a very huge number of Southern Pine Beetle, that predator-prey relationship. So we don't remove those. And like I said already, we're talking about how we're cutting them up, the trees. So unfortunately, that's the big thing. They are eyesores. I've gotten a lot of complaints about the trees just rotting, but they do serve a purpose. They, put nutrients back in the soil. There's a lot of insects that rely on the dead material. So it's just an example of what we're talking about when we go do suppression. We know these are the active areas with the red dots, and we'll circle and say we're going to treat this area and such. So this is an example of pre-suppression at Munn's Pond, which is Suffolk County lands, and Henry's Hollow. And this is just to show the property line. Of course, the beetle does not pay attention to political boundaries. So we felt this was the first spot we treated, and we felt that this was showing the classic spread. You can see the in stage 3, 2, and then 1. You can see the definitive pattern. It's heading in north-northwest direction. And the concern is that, like the other pictures you saw, that in front of this was 200 acres of pitch pine. So it's safe to assume that if we did nothing, that would expand. Here's pictures. We were very lucky to have our forest rangers help. So this is Henry's Hollow, what it looks like today. Do you have a picture of it side by side or no?
No.
Okay, that's fine. So what I'll do is, so here, and I'll just go back. So you can see this is where the expanse is. What we did is when I went out to delineate where the infestation was, kind of loosely like this, and you see that in the aerial. So that's the same kind of different angle. That's a little bit closer. So you get an idea. I'm very, very happy how well it worked. It worked a little bit better than I even hoped. You can see very, very little. There's a couple of trees, but, and here's the stage 3s we left. But over here, we cut over 2,800 trees or so, and very little expansion. So it's nice to show that suppression has worked in this situation. There's another picture of it. And here's from the ground. So there's a definitive line of healthy trees, and then you can even see the fading of the crowns there. And here's just a picture. This is the blue stained fungus that John was talking about earlier, and that's what we want to see. We want to see that bark sloughed off. That means that high increase in mortality. Here's a part of the ICS is we're trying to keep track of what we cut, where we've cut, and so it just shows how many trees have been cut in which area. And just an example, this is New Jersey also, but you can see the stage 3 trees, and there's the 2, and here's the suppression. And this is that clarid beetle I mentioned earlier. So they, like I said, they go and they eat many other beetles, not just Southern Pine Beetle. So that's why we use it as a tool of determining what population level we have for Southern Pine Beetle. So like I said, thinning is the more long-term solution. Like I said, anything over 80 square foot basal area is prone, research has shown is prone to be infestation. With the thinning, it not only, trees can't move for the resources, so they're stuck where they are. The more trees per acre, so the higher the basal area, the less resources they have. So the tree's only defense is to pitch out. So the more resources they have, more water, more sunlight, the more vigorous they are, the more able they are to fight against the pine beetle. And we were very fortunate to have 10 foresters come down last year, June, to inventory our largest property, Rocky Point. And what we did from there is they went out and just did a standard inventory that we do throughout New York State on state forests. And it's just, I was very fortunate that they were able to do this in a week. It was fantastic. So what we were able to do is, using a formula from the Forest Service of a hazard rating. So what we can do is we do that with the colors, which really helps it out, to sit there and say, okay, where are problem areas? So the green are the areas of heavy oak. Obviously, oak is not a target of Southern Pine Beetle, so that's very low in the hazard rating. Some of the highest hazard ratings are the old fuel breaks. So this is where, when RCA owned the property, it was just cleared. And pitch pine loves that disturbance, so they came back very, very thick. We would love to treat that. What we tried to do with the timber sale is look for a purpose of having someone cut the property. So we decided on treating these areas, and we unfortunately did not get any bids. But, so this is an example of the thinning. So we're not clear cutting. It's, we're just removing it's called thinning from below. So we foster the healthiest trees to remain and try to remove the smaller trees. Usually they're all the same age, so if they're smaller for a reason, usually poor genetics. So what we're going is, a lot of our forests look like this, and we're hoping to make them look a little more like that in the future. And Wertheim was able to have the compact team come and treat some of their lands, so it appears that it seemed to work so far. Here's an example down in Florida of a stand that was thinned, and you can see it right here, and then afterwards you can see that Southern Pine Beetle came and attacked the other stands, and the stand that was thinned appeared to do very well. The biggest thing is education outreach. It's a very complicated issue. There's no easy solution. I wish there was. We have a very, very good website, and we'd like you to report infestations. Right now, it's just, there's no program for private homeowners. I wish there was. It's a huge cost, but please visit the website, and there's a lot of good information on it now. And part of the planning, we have to sit here and figure out after we do the surveys, the ground truthing, and where are areas to treat, you know, as far as the education outreach, data collection. This is a huge, huge program. And dealing with the short and long-term solutions. So short term is the suppression, long term we're looking to treat some areas to make them more beetle, not proof, but resistant. We don't want to see rapid death. Unfortunately, at Connecticut State Park, they've lost, I would say, at least 80% of their pitch pine. And it's a huge area to lose. What we've been doing also is a lot of research. So with the cut and leave, unfortunately, cut and remove is the most effective, but we do not have a market for the logs, so we're stuck with cut and leave. So what we're doing now is a Hubble data logger, and what that does is it determines the temperature fluctuations. So we know that Southern Pine Beetle likes a certain niche of temperatures, so below 8 degrees will cause mortality, and then above, I think it's 97, I forgot off the top of my head, it'll die also. So we're seeing what's the purpose of leaving them standing or out in the open like this. And also, like John said, we go and we'll do mortality surveys. So we'll take little sections of the of an infested tree and count how many beetles larvae have survived in the winter, and then we extrapolate out to see what kind of mortality we expect. The biggest thing that we're concerned about is losing our cultural identity. We're the Pine Barrens, we're the largest pine barrens in New York State, outside of the Albany pine bush, of course. So the concern that we have is that if left alone, this beetle will never see trees over 29 years old. It's safe to assume in some areas. What we've been doing is trapping. They've done that upstate. They call that a early discovery rapid response. So we have found it upstate in traps. We have not found infested trees yet, but what that helps is it gives them an idea that this beetle was much more widespread than we ever thought, and the traps are not necessarily very good at determining the population of the pine beetle numbers, but it just lets us know where they are in areas, and that helps us plan for suppression and management. And here's an example of what these traps look like. What they are is they have a little pheromone trap, and so the beetles fly in and they're collected at the bottom, and then someone gets the fun job of counting all those beetles. So these are all declared, and we've seen that, like I said, very little Southern Pine Beetle numbers, but this is what's helpful to know, that we know that if there's a huge explosion in these declared numbers, that there's a very, very large number of Southern Pine Beetle. So this is a big thing, like I said, we're monitoring constantly, especially with the suppression at Henry's Hollow. I've gone out and been very pleased on the regeneration already. Pitch pine, luckily, is a very, loves disturbance, so pretty much we had a rapid turnover in canopy, and I'm already seeing some pine seedlings as tall as a foot. So I'm very happy to see that. And like John said, the beetle's here and it's not going anywhere. Even with the cold temperature we saw last year, and it's safe to assume we might have had 90% mortality. The thing is, the beetle is of exponential growth, so just because we had 90% mortality, we probably would have a different conversation if we did not have that this year. So why the biggest concern is in New Jersey pine barrens, which are much larger, they've lost more acreage than we have total in just a decade. So their biggest year was 14,000 acres that they've lost. And so, like I said, the long-term management is suppression, thinning, prescribed fire. We'd like to do more of those, and potential use of biological controls. They're not that effective. That doesn't mean that we're not going to try to use them. And it's going to be an ongoing thing. We're going to constantly fly, monitor, see what areas are growing, which areas are not, and to create that environment unfavorable to the beetle. And feel free to contact us. Thank you so much.
step down. Oh, no, you got the microphone, that's right. Sure.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions. And if you have a question, please come to the aisle mics because we are recording this. And eventually the recordings will go up on the Long Island Nature Organization website through links to YouTube. So, first question.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time out in the woods. I lead hikes, and I'm seeing infested trees everywhere. But there's two types of beetles. It's not just the southern pine, it's also the turpentine beetle. How can I tell the difference which beetle is infesting the tree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, you'll see both beetles in trees sometimes too. Turpentine rarely attacks above 6 feet, and the pitch is very, very different. The beetle's much larger, so usually the tube is a different color. It's hard to explain without a picture, but if you see anything above 6-8 feet or so, it's usually southern pine beetle.
You'll also see with the black turpentine, the globules of pine sap are much more amorphous, and they're larger, especially around the base of the tree. With the southern pine beetle, they can be much smaller and kind of uniform in shape, like a piece of popcorn. And they go all the way up to the crown of the tree.
With regard to that, is there a difference in the way the bark comes off the tree? Because sometimes when I try to check, the bark falls off very easily, and it's clear you can see the channels underneath. Other times I can't get the bark off. Is that a difference between the two?
No, not really. It just depends how far along dead the tree is. You know, I've seen trees die as fast as a month, and you will see a lot of woodpecker damage too. That's usually a good sign. You'll see just all the bark sloughed off from the woodpeckers going up and down the tree, eating them.
Hi, thank you. What is a natural control in an environment wherever they're more native to? You know, I mean, I think of this as an invasion. Where'd they come from and how are they controlled wherever they're from? I'm sure it's not a dramatic loss of trees in wherever they're from. Just guessing. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So they are native to the south because of climate change. They're up here. Luckily, this beetle is one of the most studied beetles around. There's decades of research. Feel free, you can Google the Southern Pine Beetle publication 2 by the Forest Service. And it is a natural occurrence. What we're afraid of is losing 20,000 acres in a year. So down south, they have thousands and thousands of acres. It's a huge expanse. So they've been managing it for it also. There's a much bigger timber industry down there. So we don't really see the outbreaks. In fact, as far as outbreaks go, we are the hotspot, which helps us to get money for the Forest Service to attack the beetle.
But the management techniques that we outlined here before are ones that are being used and have been used for decades down south. They're tried and true, and ones that are being used in New Jersey as well.
Yes, areas that have been devastated where you have these spots where all the trees die, can they be replanted or do you just rely on just what's there, seedlings to sprout up?
Yeah, we are looking into that. Like I said, I can just speak on DEC State Land's behalf. I have been very pleasantly surprised how well it's coming back, but that is something that we will definitely look into replanting areas. I would assume at Connecticut, which does not have the pine left to reseed it. So yes, absolutely.
As an example, there's a lot of areas east of the lab that were devastated by, we call it oak mortality. There are different reasons for that, but we have these significant die-offs of oak trees. And in their place, over time, pitch pines happen to sprout up. So the forest is somewhat resilient in that. Other species will come in there. You're opening up the canopy to additional sunlight. Pitch pines also, one of the things we're looking at is if the stumps which remain, if maybe they can generate root sprouts, because pitch pines have the ability to sprout out the sides of their trunks and so forth. So, and there may be seeds in the ground surface that have been there dormant that could then, now they're getting more sunlight, could potentially come up. So that's something that DEC especially is looking at right now in these areas that especially where they've done the suppression treatment.
And along those lines, our biggest concern is invasive species moving into an area that has been treated. So we're absolutely monitoring for that.
So, John,
Yes.
what would you recommend to private landowners like Fire Island? We've got a number of communities out there. They're talking to some of the landscapers out there. There's been talk of maybe using an insecticide or something. I mean, so what's your recommendation for private landowners and landscapers?
Yeah, it's a huge problem issue for them. If they have the means to take the trees down, absolutely. If the tree is not infested, there has been several studies that show bifenthrin, onyx is a trade name, has been somewhat effective as a bark treatment, but that is only effective for, perfect example, private homeowners. You have a couple trees in your yard you want to protect.
And that's for trees before they're infested.
Before they're
right? It's
infested.
really preventative treatment.
Right.
And the other thing is that the folks who are private landowners would have to, before they do anything, have to make sure that what they're proposing to do is in conformance with, obviously, Fire Island National Seashore has certain regulatory requirements on the mainland. The towns and other entities have regulatory requirements, so they'd have to check with that first. But if possible, suppression, actually removing the trees would be the best thing. But as John alluded to with pesticides, they have to be applied the entire surface of the bark, 360 degrees before the beetles attack, and I think they have to do maintenance sprays too.
Yeah, and then they have to be a licensed applicator. You can't just go to Home Depot and buy this.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
You mentioned basal area and that there was a threshold above or below which there was more of a danger of infestation. Can you just explain how that's calculated?
The basal area?
Yeah.
All right, that's complicated. Easier way is trees per acre. Basal area is essentially square footage. It's a term, it's a forestry term that I can go to a forester and say, oh, our forest is at 100 basal area, and he knows immediately what I'm saying. So a better way to explain it is just trees per acre is a good way. So the higher it is, the more trees per acre. Essentially, it's based mostly on diameter size.
I was wondering, you had mentioned that they don't like cold temperatures. And I'm thinking, I'm using the term cryo-freezing, but has anyone ever thought of like cryo-freezing? Not minus 200, but like freezing the tree?
Well, it'd just be difficult. We're talking landscape level, thousands of acres of treating,
But you were
unfortunately.
talking thousands of acres of pesticide.
Well, we're not treating any pesticide, no.
I just
no.
thought it's something to look into.
Yeah.
Following up on that, I had a similar question. I was wondering if they die at -8 degrees Fahrenheit, then I was thinking, why not douse stage 2 trees in liquid CO2 spray, which would probably kill the beetles before the larvae emerge and infect more trees.
I mean, it is definitely an option. Just logistically, it would be very difficult to go and spray thousands of trees. And then you have to think that pine barrens exist for our drinking water. So what is a treatment worse than the disease? One of those things.
Yeah, I thought as much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to go to the middle and then to the side.
Hello, John and John.
Hi, Ken, how you doing?
I've been watching this since it began, and from the very beginning, I realized that, 100 years ago, a large percentage of the trees in the woods were chestnut. As I think one of you just pointed out, you kill off where the oaks are dying off, the pines come in, and where the pines die off, the oaks come in. But is there any kind of a deliberate plan being started towards what the pine barrens are going to look like, and if we can influence it in any way in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What is the pine barrens?
It's an issue that's been debated, Ken, for the last 20 years, and a lot of the folks in the room know that too. I think the one thing that most people would agree upon is that, well, all the grassland areas should be maintained as such. We could start there. But in regard to what the rest of the Pine Barrens should look like, you could talk to anybody in this room, and there'll be various agreements about, starting at, do nothing, just leave things be, to, more active management, really engaged in mechanical treatment to select for certain species and not others. There was the Central Pine Barrens Commission. I was part of those discussions when I was at Brookhaven Town over 20 years ago, and there was never a consensus as to what it should look like. I think the major agreement besides the grasslands is that there should be a mosaic of different types of successional stages and different types of community compositions. How you get to that, and that's on the landscape level, but how do you get to that on a parcel by parcel basis? We're not at that point yet, and I'm not sure that we will get to that point.
I was wondering if the females could be sterilized and through a DNA setup and eliminated naturally that way. They do not belong here, so they can be eliminated here. Is
Nice.
anything going that direction?
That'd be nice. The problem is there's such prolific breeders. Each female lays approximately 30, 40 eggs, and each life stage is about 2 weeks. So we see about 4 to 5 generations a year.
Okay, any other questions? One more.
We have some white pine plantations on a couple of our preserves on the North Shore, and we haven't seen signs of it yet, but we do need to develop a pretty good monitoring protocol for that. We don't have many people that could incorporate it, but would we be able to get some recommendations, you think, from the website to do that, or would that be the best place to?
Or feel free to ask me also.
We'll do that too,
Yeah.
so, okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Sure.
So I was wondering, what are the interactions between Southern Pine Beetles and Southern Pine Beetles? Do they compete with each other, or they just co-occupy the pine areas? Not clear.
Get it?
Is there any
The interactions between turpentine beetles and southern pine beetle.
Oh, okay, yes. Like I said, I've seen it where turpentine usually will go in and attack a tree. They don't necessarily kill it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I have seen where turpentine will come in and then southern pine will come in. Usually southern pine is a secondary. Tree is stressed one other way, usually lightning strike or salt spray or something, and then you'll see the southern pine will come in and start breeding. But they're always flying around looking for, the conditions have to be right for the infestation to occur is one thing to remember. It's not necessarily always going to die, always going to behave this way. The basal area, the trees per acre has to be a certain threshold. Things have to be right for that huge expansion like you saw in that one picture to occur.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we're out of time. I want to thank John and John.